is our work session on, let me get it straight. Work session on 2016-27. Let's go around the table and identify ourselves for the record. Julia?
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Amy Demboski.
I'll leave for 1 second. Take away the
Oh,
nameplate.
you're- Patrick, you want to say your name?
Patrick Flip.
Daryl has to respond.
Jennifer Gospel.
And Mr. Flynn. Whose name is taken away from him while he was gone.
So now we just say, hey, you.
Amy? You want to lead the discussion?
I'll just start it off, but I'm actually gonna rope Daryl into helping lead the discussion on this, and Julia. So I wanna start by saying, when we passed the initial licensing ordinances and zoning ordinances for the marijuana issue, there was an intentional discussion made as far as what type of meeting would be held. And the discussion and when we had it was we weren't gonna call it a community council meeting, rather we were gonna call it a community meeting. Now we all know that community councils are established in charters, so we give great weight to their participation. But because we didn't say a required meeting for a new business would be at a community council meeting, there was some concern from across the municipality of the community councils that by some reason, maybe they would be intentionally cut out of the process. That was never the intent. So what we tried to develop was a mechanism to create communication between the marijuana businesses that are wanting to start in your communities and the community councils. So with the ordinances that we've already passed, we have established a neighborhood responsibility plan, but we have to go back into the community council ordinance and define what that means. So that's what this AO 2016-27 attempts to do. And I think it's important to recognize the key for this was, number one, it's a mechanism for communication. So the businesses, when they apply, the goal was to have them come in, introduce themselves to the community councils, exchange information, contact information, the community council's preferred method of communication, and if a problem were to come up, that both sides would be committed to at least talking to each other. So that was the goal. There was no intent to make this a legal binding document when we talk about a neighborhood responsibility plan. You know, there's some verbiage in here about an MOU or a memorandum of understanding, and I think Daryl can talk about how that's worked in Fairview and why that came about. But I think the goal here, like I said, it's a venue for communication. It's not a veto of anything the assembly's going to do, but it will help us discern whether there has been proper engagement or at least an intended engagement with community councils. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes.
And so if I can, I'd like to
Let me go to Julia first. Julia, because we're starting to get some emails, some community councils worried that they're going to incur some legal liability if in fact they don't approve or they disapprove of community council. Nothing in this, from my perspective, creates legal liability. Julia, am I right or wrong?
I believe you're right about that.
The intent, as Amy said here, was that there was to be engagement by the community council. And so that's a requirement of the community council to engage in these kind of discussions when they're coming forward. But there's not a requirement that they approve or insert themselves otherwise in the process than to be open in an engagement and then report out on what it gave a mechanism so that to assist assembly community councils in how to manage this change that's going to happen.
Ultimately, it's up to the assembly to approve conditional use.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to get done with that one, because I had some community council that said, we're worried about getting some legal liability. This doesn't create legal liability. Daryl?
Well, I also have had, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've also had several calls from community councils, and they're asking what liability they would have if they turn down a marijuana license. Well, they don't have the authority to turn down a marijuana license. Community councils are strictly advisory. And I I think one of the drivers behind this proposal was the memorandum of understanding that Fairview Community Council developed with Brother Francis Shelter and Beans Cafe over the last few years. I'm sure you're all aware it's been a very rocky relationship. I was the council president for 5 years, and there was a lot of contentious dialogue and interaction between those two nonprofits and the Fairview Community Council. Then several years ago, the Community Council negotiated similar memorandums similar to this proposal that opened lines of communication, designated the points of contact, how the preferred method of contact. And I had Susan Bomilowski approach me a couple months ago at lunch and told me that she wished she had listened to me years ago when I advised Catholic Social Services to do something like this, that it would have made things a lot better in the neighborhood and a lot smoother. You may not necessarily always agree on everything, but the relationship between the Fairview Community Council and Brother Francis Shelter and Beans Cafe is much better than it was years ago, having this communication in place. So if you look at it, you know, the assembly, the code requires that community councils be solicited, input from community councils be solicited for conditional use permits for liquor licenses. So I think this just follows that model. And by amending the code 2.40050 under functions, you're adding something that really is necessary to take to community councils to solicit their input. It fits in with the purpose of community councils. I think there is some confusion the way maybe we can tweak the draft and clarify that it isn't mandatory and that issuance, operation, and renewal of a marijuana license is not contingent upon developing this plan. But the plan could be used to inform the assembly, just like comments from community councils regarding liquor licenses inform the assembly.
Ms. Johnston and Ms.
And that kind of leads into my question, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but why are we using the word shall instead of may?
Sorry.
Sorry.
What line is that?
Line 7 and page 2, I think.
The concept was that it's sort of like mediation. You have to go through the marriage council before you do the divorce. And so, yes, they have to engage. They don't have to come to an agreement. They don't have to resolve all their differences. But they do have to establish these points of contact. That the marijuana establishment, for instance, is required to, I'm on page 2, and so in some places it says endeavor to. So it's will engage, or could have been shall engage, will engage in neighborhood responsibility planning. So I'm on line 20 of page 2, and endeavor to. And then here are the different items. So you gotta come together and make it, and make a good faith effort to do it. And then the assembly can judge. You know, if the community council comes up and says, well, you know, it didn't work, then you know, there's an area that you're gonna have more problems with because it didn't work.
Erica was raising her hand.
Erica?
Thank you. I attended
Can you come join this, man, please?
Sure. I attended a meeting of the Spenard Community Council that was particularly for marijuana businesses a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, and they were under the impression that every community council was required to form a marijuana subcommittee.
No,
So
I've
that's-
asked them to, but it's not required.
Okay, so that's the perception, at least that is out there among some people. I think the conversation you two just had was very instructive because I heard optional and now I heard, no, it's required. I want to point out that in the land use ordinance, it says, the owner or operator of a marijuana retail sales establishment is encouraged to engage in neighborhood responsibility planning with neighborhood residents and other businesses. Where available, this may be done in conjunction with the community council. So if you want to require community council engagement, we're going to have to go back and change the land use ordinance to say this must be done in conjunction with the community council.
Okay.
And to follow up,
And then I got Amy, so
to
we'll get to y'all.
follow up on this full discussion, because, you know, community councils all have their own personalities. And, and I wonder, I mean, if, and another reason I'm wondering about the shall versus may is the community councils themselves probably are thinking of how they would like to structure this neighborhood responsibility arrangement, Bernard being a perfect case. And so I'm wondering if in this language, if we're kind of structuring it for them, as opposed to giving them the flexibility, first of all, to be engaged, the flexibility, how they're engaged. And, you know, we just spent a whole bunch of time on their bylaws, and I just, knowing that they feel kind of autonomous, this could be fascinating.
I still have a couple of them done bylaws in a year and a half, so we're getting there. Mr. Bowski, and then I'll get Mr. Flynn.
Julia, did you want me to comment first?
Sure. I'm thinking that the intent here, and as Daryl said, we, you know, need to have some tweaks to it, but the intent here on the shell was, again, as it says here, to have additional community engagement. I think that the concept about the marijuana subcommittees didn't come out of this.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where that
There was,
came from.
there was already this perception of the marijuana subcommittees going on and, by community councils, and so, the concept that, Amy and I worked with was to have some kind of a focus and to not do what is to sort of avoid, so much detail that community councils didn't have flexibility, but to also provide some kind of backbone, because what we were, hearing from, at the different meetings, and I got calls, and Amy got calls, and other people got calls, was, we're from the community council, we don't know what we're gonna do, and can you give us some guidance on what we're supposed to do? So that seemed to be a good match to put the ideas that had come forward out of the Fairview, because they had been working on this longer and kind of had a vision for what they would like to see, to use those as conceptual, not quite as structured as the community council bylaws are, but to have some kind of a format to work on. That was the intent, and as Daryl said, you know, this was there before a lot of other questions were answered, so.
Mr. Flynn.
I believe Mr. Muskie.
Actually, no, I didn't start. No, I wanted to be really clear in what, that, so people understand. I know the word shall is in line 7, and just to highlight what Julia said, you know, if you actually look at line 20, I think it is, or, yeah, 20, it says you will endeavor to do these things, exchange information, you know, get a point of contact. So, I mean, the whole point here is, like I said, in Title 21, where it says they'll have a community meeting, we reference the neighborhood responsibility plan, and now we're trying to define it. And I think it's really helpful to, and this is what I'm trying to get out of this meeting. I had no comments on this ordinance prior to our assembly meeting, so I'm trying to understand specifically with this ordinance, what is it people like or don't like, and how is it we need recommendations to basically get this over the hump, essentially.
Mr. Steele
Just
and Ms. Gray.
on that point, and that's the thing that stuck out at me also with the shell.
But you see the endeavor now.
And, yeah, I just said, additional community, opportunities for community engagement. And so it's a listing of opportunities, because I also have a bit of a problem with the, develop a schedule of mutual engagement and outreach. Well, what if somebody misses a meeting? I mean, so I like it better to be opportunities for engagement as opposed to requirements.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn and Ms. Gray.
Yeah, For those of you who haven't picked up your mail, I responded to the letter we received from a Fairview Community Council resident, where he asked us to intercede in community council matters. I suggested that, in my experience, community councils, with community councils, most would not appreciate excessive oversight by the municipality. So, I understand the subtlety of saying shall include and then endeavor to is somewhat permissive and not necessarily prescriptive. I would think this would probably be better received because, you know, Fairview Community Council is a great community council, very active and engaged. They work really hard. Not all community councils are at that level to be. It's not a criticism, it's just different neighborhoods use that resource differently. So I think rather than shall, and I don't know if you can put this in code, you can strike, yeah, you can strike it out, but you just say, you know, applicants are strongly encouraged to, or something like that, and then rather than endeavor, you know, say, a neighborhood responsibility plan may include, but is not limited to, and then list these out. So you're giving them a framework that they can take or leave.
So each community council can adapt it.
Yeah, and it sort of does that already, but when you say endeavor, endeavor is a little stronger than may. And that's just my opinion, based on the different experiences I've had with different community councils.
Ms. Gray Johnson.
You want to take Ms. Tucker first and then I'll go?
If I missed,
It's all right.
you gotta go.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
Ms. Tucker?
Well, you know, in looking at this, I think that we don't, my recommendation is, because the line 7 language was put in there by me just to give a transition. And so it's not required. So you don't have to worry about wordsmithing, you can just take that out, if that's what's causing that. And then the only concern that I would have about having it may include and not limited to is that we were trying to put some break on the community councils in the sense that the report that we had from Mr. Trainee and from some of the, including Chris Constant from his community council, was that there were many community councils who wanted the veto power on marijuana coming into their community. And so.
Northeast Community Council, good case in point.
Yeah. And so if you put that they may include, but not limited to these, then you're gonna have a whole bunch of community council requirements and hoops that are gonna not be so good, in terms of lining up with the Assembly's, code. So I just share that with you about.
Would you be more comfortable that may include, as opposed to not limited, not limited to, or do you say just?
Well, I think you gotta go back and decide, is it gonna be, and the duly authorized representatives of the community council will engage, I mean, the whole sentence there, in line 19 and 20, is that they will engage in neighborhood responsibility planning. So are you gonna require them to do that or not? And so if you don't wanna require them to do that, then we're kind of in what Erica said, then let's, you know, amend, there, but you're gonna have to have the Assembly, my recommendation is the Assembly figure out some way to structure the community council input that they want to, hear back. And there's gonna be a lot of noise, but that you're gonna hear back anyway, but the bottom line, it seemed from what, Fairview had done in terms of homework, is that the bottom line that the Assembly's gonna wanna know is this business, setting out, in the right manner, or is making an effort to set up a working relationship with that community council? Or is the Assembly setting up a Spirits of Alaska situation from the beginning, where they're gonna be like this? And so we had to envision some things that would help the Assembly, get that feedback that were reasonable, you know, and not, Chris Constant had done just a tremendous amount of homework, which I understand from Daryl now was also predicated on things that had worked before. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we, you know, with Amy's, encouragement, Daryl and I, focused that. He did actually the yeoman's work on doing it. I pushed it before and added this transition, which is giving everybody a problem, about line 7 about shall include, you know, you don't need that, but I recommend that as we do a transition from the community as we see it now to a community that has marijuana establishments and community councils, that you help community councils integrate those businesses by having some kind of setup.
I'm gonna go to.
Mr. Bosky, I think, wanted to respond on this topic, so you can go to her first. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of comments. First, I want to just say I'm really glad that this ordinance is before the Rules Committee, because that's the purpose of the Rules Committee. And I also want to thank the sponsors for bringing this forward, because I think this ordinance is very good public process and policy. And I appreciate hearing everybody's comments. I think what we need to do, based on the comments from Mr. Hess, is add a section that says exactly that, you know, nobody's gonna be liable. We need to add a section to this ordinance. In addition, Ms. Tucker talked about, guidance to community council. That's one of the reasons why I really like to see with any legislation an AM, because it's a memorandum of intent. And a lot of people really don't understand the actual ordinance, and they need to have another document to clarify what's in the ordinance. And so I would highly recommend that an AM be drafted, that will give some real clear guidance to community council. This is what this is all about, and, you know, and this is your responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me go to you, Amy. When we established this originally, the purpose was to give some help to community councils. A lot of community councils have created marijuana. They view it as a drug dealer coming to their neighborhood, and they don't want a drug dealer there. The state voted to legalize recreational marijuana this year. We have to figure out how we can help the community councils, so they feel they have input into it. And beyond that, the assembly, we've got a lot more control of marijuana than we ever had, will have with alcohol. That's the way we wrote it. So the purpose of this was to help the community councils. So we may need to clean up some of the language, so we're not afraid of it. So Amy,
Yeah, and I would just like to reiterate the fact that there's a reason this is put in the community council ordinance and not the Title 21 ordinance, frankly. But when we look at this, I just want to reiterate the fact when someone is applying for a marijuana license, it says they have to have community engagement. It doesn't say they have to go to a community council meeting. And so, right, and so we have to remember our community councils, which are established in charter, from across the municipality, we've heard concerns that they're afraid that people will intentionally bypass the community council. So our goal here is try to make sure that community councils have appropriate contact information, and that they feel like if they have a problem, they know who to call, right? And we want that relationship, like Julia said, with Spirits of Alaska and other places, we've learned from those with alcohol. You know, as Daryl had mentioned, alcohol, you know, there is community council participation. So however it is we need to structure this, I'm not necessarily married to any part or piece, but I just want to make sure that community councils feel like their voice will be heard and that they feel like they're engaged. I mean, heck, it could be an email saying, this is my point of contact, here's how you get a hold of me. I mean, this could be very simple. And I think Patrick's right. I'm not looking to go into every community council and say you have to meet, once a quarter, you have to do this and that and the other. And that's not the intent at all. And so, Ms. Gray Jackson, I completely agree with you. And I dropped the ball on writing the AM, frankly. So, but I 100% agree with you. And I realized the night of the meeting that if I would have done that, I think it would have helped some of the numbers too. So we'll work on that. But it's really, really important that the Rules Committee gives us direction on where to go with this ordinance, because the goal here is just to make sure that there's open lines of communication and there's a mechanism by which our community councils feel like they have the opportunity to know who's coming into their community and have that opportunity mechanism.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, as a member of the marijuana committee, we've had numerous members of the community who have been attending our meetings over the last couple of years because they had an interest in opening a business. And so I've been communicating to them all along that it's in their best interest to start a line of communication with community councils long before we ever came up with this neighborhood responsibility plan, which in my mind should be called a neighborhood communication plan. Because that's basically all that we're requiring they do is open up a line of communications, really. And one last thing, I think we may have opened up Pandora's box with this, because I think some community councils, and maybe more than just some, are gonna wanna take this and add it to, you know, their review of liquor licenses, renewals or new liquor licenses being issued, so that there has to be a communication plan with the liquor stores as well as the marijuana establishments. And I actually don't see that as a big, bad thing. I'm just saying we should know ahead of time that that is a possibility coming down the road.
Erica?
I have a clarifying question for you all. All types of establishments are required to hold a community meeting before they submit their application, and that is intended to be the community council meeting, but there's an out for when it can't be the community council meeting. But the neighborhood responsibility planning was only put in as a requirement for retail stores. So is this Title II ordinance intended to apply to all 4 types of marijuana establishments or just the retail stores? Okay, because if that's the case, we're gonna need to
discussion was
change.
retail.
We're gonna need to
Originally-
change the code, the land use code as well.
Well, and I was gonna say, originally the discussion was retail, because
Right.
that's where you're gonna see the traffic.
Yes.
You're not gonna see traffic in laboratory testing, you're not gonna see traffic in grow operations.
And I think it's the stores where the public has
That's
kind
right,
of the most
public impact.
concern.
You still have
Yeah.
community impact from those operations, however,
There's
it would be
an-
good for them to communicate.
I agree, but, and when this first came up, you know, like I said, the real concern seemed to be the retail stores, and so that was the logical place I had to go, but.
I mean, we could do however you guys
I
wanna
think
do it,
this
but if
is
it
a
is
good-
just the stores, we should put retail stores in Title II, and if it's not just the stores, if it's all of them, we should move the requirement for neighborhood responsibility planning to the general standards and out of the retail stores.
You can always add later based on problems.
Let's start with retail.
But she's saying that, and I understand what Eric is saying now, is that the Title II requirement for engagement is broader than the Title 21
Yeah, it's an
engagement as
establishment.
it's set up now. And that she thinks that her recommendation would be that there would be parity, you know, between those two.
So what, in plain speak, Title 21 specifically is retail, right? But this is drafted as saying marijuana establishment, so even though retail was what we were contemplating when we did Title 21, this is establishments, which would cover all of them in this title, so.
Let me get Tim's perspective, your perspective.
We're liable to have problems with all of it, and it's good for everybody to communicate, but I'm not sure. It depends on how prescriptive this turns out to be, whether or not we want to put the other types of establishments in here. But, if I can, there are just a couple other things that I had. One was the wording up here in B, line 7 issue, and I think we beat that one to death. I have a little bit of a problem with C and F in this, which they seem to again be prescriptive in terms of saying, hey, establishment member, you have to come before the community council on these dates or at these meetings. And to me, I would love to provide them with the information of where they can make these contacts and integrate with the community. But I'm not sure that I want to be so prescriptive that they feel they've got to go do the community council's bidding on certain dates and so on.
Julia?
I think that this is where the assembly needs to decide if they want things funneled through the community council before they come to the assembly, or if you're just gonna take them from people and have your assembly time taken up. Because there's nothing here that it's an endeavor to require, but these points, I can see, those are the things that come in front of the legislative bodies, and these things about that 1,000 feet, you've seen it over and over again with your liquor. And so you wanna have it, there, or do you wanna have, kind of push it to the community council preventively ahead of time, to at least have them work it, so that you're not chasing your tail around and around every time a license comes up in front of you?
I don't want them to misconstrue the responsibility of the community outreach. It's not for this body that's set up in the community to dictate to them this, that, and the other thing. It's to communicate with the community on these particular topics. And so in my mind, they're opportunities as opposed to mandatory. However, when we start approving licenses, I suspect we will say, have you met with the community? Have you done your due diligence in terms of community? That's, I don't want to set it up so much. I can see community council where they would come in and they would say, hey, we would like to have you there every May, at our May meeting every year, and so at least we can air whatever issues are and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure that we want to be that prescriptive.
Right, but it's endeavor to establish a schedule. It's not that and so if they fail, then you know that they failed, and then
That's
and
true.
when they come in front of you and there's complaints, then you say, if it's the community council coming in, they'd say, okay, so community council, did you endeavor to establish, oh yeah, we told they had to be here in May and blah, blah, blah. And you know that that's not reasonable. But the idea is to get some criteria so that
We
when
want
they're
a relationship developed here.
Yeah, so that when they're coming in front of you, you have some guidelines as the assembly to say, okay, well, where did it break down on here? Did you do this? Well, no, they didn't. Well, then you know, and you'll know it if it's the establishment coming up. But otherwise, what we've seen in alcohol is it goes round and round, and you don't have any list to say, okay, did you try this? Did you try this? And it's all ad hoc. So we thought we would take what we had learned from the alcohol establishments and put it, especially the troublesome ones, and put it to this so that you don't end up with, what was that one, the Call of the Wild?
Yeah, call
In a marijuana establishment situation.
Yeah.
Good old days. Mr. Peterson? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at, on page 3, letter H, where it's saying develop a memorandum of understanding. And most of the community councils that I go to don't have attorneys. I mean, there might be an attorney that attends those meetings occasionally. And so I'm wondering, would the muni be able to provide some sort of template so that this memorandum of understanding, would they just have to fill in some names and addresses and dates and things? Is that a possibility?
Erica?
Sure.
I mean, that seems like that would make sense to me, to try to make it easy.
Daryl and I even talked about that a little bit, because.
That would be useful.
And I can work with Daryl on that.
you know,
Good.
Because in the same way that the assembly ultimately codified what needed to be as guidelines in by template for the community council bylaws, then having an MOU template, I think that's a fabulous thing.
Great, thank you.
Amy?
Thank you. And I wanted to go back to kind of what Julia was saying. So the purpose of this was to kind of be the mechanism for when licenses come before us. We can look at it and say, did you talk to your community council? And we can see, and if it's a template that says, Rabbit Creek Community Council, Pop Business A. And then here's our contact information, here's our address, after hours contact. If, you get 3 complaints, we promise we'll come in Or, you know, we'll endeavor to come in at your next community council meeting in 30 days notice. Just whatever they talk about, just to be able to say, yeah, we're gonna try this. But if they don't, I mean, we as assembly members have the mechanism to look at it and say, okay, you guys don't have a plan, but you went and talked, yep, we went and talked, and everybody's pretty happy, at least they exchanged information. But if they didn't do it at all, we'll say, well, why didn't you? But it gives us, this is that vessel for saying, okay, you know, did you engage the community council? Did you try? Did you, yes, did you know? I mean, did you exchange information? Because I could see an opportunity where licensees come before us and just say, you know, no, I turned in my application and, you know, instead I had this, you know, and this is what the community councils were telling me they were concerned about. I had this community council, I had this community meeting, yet no one from the community council attended or knew about it. And that's what the fear is, and I think that's why I was trying to have something loose, but enough that we can use our independent judgment when the license comes before us to see if there was a good faith effort.
Maybe what we need is a list in our licensing packet, which is a check off. I mean, you know, and they get a packet that kind of says, it shows what we're going to look at and that interaction.
So that the clerk, so when they came into the clerk with their application, the box, they could check the box that we've had the meeting with, the community meeting.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
This is such a new process. You know, a lot of this is what I wish we'd done with alcohol. That came years ago, and it's been a flawed process since then. But I can see we get a packet in, and it's gonna have how many other marijuana licenses are within this community council. That'll be useful for us. And that's what I want to see the clerk's office give us.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Peterson's remarks made me think about the process for grants, for state grants, legislative grants, and I'm sure you've seen them. There's a box you check, did you hold your community meeting? And you have to do that check box and submit it to the legislature.
Although there was one administration that checked, they had, but when we looked at them, they had never actually done the community council. They thought about going. Yes, and I won't say what administration it was.
The code requires that the summary of the community meeting be included in the application,
Okay.
so you will all get that.
Good.
Whatever works.
So the other thing, Mr. Trainee, I'd like to ask the committee, you know, during the assembly meeting, we heard a lot of commentary on item H, which was develop a memorandum of understanding. And I don't know, I understand the concern, and I tried to express that this was optional. You know, you don't have to sit there and have this huge legal document, but I don't think that was clearly communicated. So, you know, I had heard some people saying we should just strike item H, and I just want to get actual feedback on what is it gonna take and what changes are gonna have to be made for assembly members to feel that this is adequate.
Well, I think Erica said they could come up with something.
If they do a template, I think.
So if we just have the template that, when we name it memorandum of understanding, are we okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanna make sure that it's clearly understood, and like I said, once we get this done, we'll have an AM.
And this is all new territory. I appreciate you leading the way because, like I said, you're striking where we need to go with this. Yes, Julia?
So just to follow up on what Amy said, so I'll just give you what I have down here so far, just as a concept. So I would have on page 1, at line 28, I would add 4 marijuana retail establishments.
Yes.
So then we have that. On
Page 2?
On page 2,
Line
I would,
7?
yeah, I would just strike the under the added language. It was a transition, it's causing more confusion. I'm gonna work about because it says will engage in neighborhood responsibility planning and endeavor to, and I'm gonna match that up with, I need to look at what we put in Title 21, so that it kind of is, parallel here. I'm thinking that, that the template, we could actually put in the code,
Have it in here, have the code in here?
we can either have the template in here, or we can have it referenced.
I'd rather have it in here than a reference.
Yeah, and then we can attach it to the AM. And then the AM is gonna review, my notes indicate that the AM is gonna pick up, that word that Tim Steele and, that was important to Tim Steele and, Mr. Peterson and maybe many others, which is that we're talking about a communications plan. And so we can incorporate that in so that we are kind of on the same page about that. And it's gonna cover the legal liability. And then what other clarifying points that perhaps are, mean that we're not gonna necessarily have to change code, but it's gonna be what Elvia talked about in terms of what an AM really serves.
If I may,
Elvia?
Mr. Chairman, right, my recommendation was in terms of the legal liability, that there actually be a section in the ordinance.
Oh, good thinking, okay.
Not just in the.
Okay, that's right. I wrote that down and then I didn't say that, that's right. And so I have to have a place saver for that.
Is community council not an agent of, not a part of the city government? We've already discussed that over the years. We want to encourage liability of their actions.
And one other thing, if I may add to something, you know, I never envisioned this to be, you know how we put conditions on all these liquor licenses and stuff? I never envisioned this right here to come with a huge list of conditions that the community council expects for this particular establishment. They can do their own resolution on that. This, to me, is just what Julia said, is a communication plan. It's an opportunity for communication. And it's.
Community council's gonna be different.
Right, so my goal was never to get this huge list of their hours should be this, and they should be this, and they should, you know, that was not my intent.
So we
Well, you
wanna
know-
make sure that that intent is reflected in the AM.
I think that would be helpful.
But there's so much fear out there of what's coming. Elvie and I were called to a chiropractor's office, and he and his wife are both chiropractors. They had an individual come in to talk to them that said, hey, I'm here to let you know I'm gonna open a retail shop right next to them. They lost four customers just from somebody saying they were gonna open a retail business up next to them that heard the discussion. And that's a problem with this going legal is, there's a lot of fear out there. We wanna make sure that we can do what we can to take care of that fear factor.
And I would just like to, just turn this back over to Daryl and see if he has any closing thoughts, because he was so instrumental in putting this together.
Daryl?
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. I agree with a lot of the proposed changes, but I still encourage inclusion of language that spells out that issuance, operation, and renewal of the license is not contingent upon developing these plans. And maybe even language saying that the plans can be used to, may be used to inform the assembly. I think that would help explain. It might allay some concern.
It's used to encourage communication.
Yes.
Julie's ready.
Well, you know, in some communications, some community councils may try to get these businesses to do things that aren't reasonable. And so, you know, they can come before the assembly and say, we're doing our best, but some of this stuff just is not reasonable. And then we will be the last arbiter in that situation.
Ultimately, that's what this subject is. Ms. Gray Jackson?
So I gotta leave in a couple minutes. And with that said, the committee's only 3 members. So just so it's real clear, I'd like to make a motion that the Assembly Rules Committee supports AO 2016-27 for the proposed amendments developed during this meeting.
Second.
Are you on the committee too?
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought.
Moved to second discussion from current sitting assembly members. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's approved.
Okay, good.
Thank you all for your help.
Okay. Guess what?